All right, so I wanted to make a video about something that happened to me recently. Many of you probably didn't notice, but we actually lost a significant portion of our footage from our Europe trips. I was going to actually mention it in the video, but actually because the recovery company did such a good job, I decided to not mention it and make it its own little video. Now, I learned a few things along the way from losing footage, and I was hoping to share some of those today. All right, so if you go back to our Copenhagen video, you'll notice that there is a period of time where we go through a botanical garden. So it was actually interesting because in the botanical garden, I noticed that the camera was behaving somewhat oddly. Every time I clicked record, it started recording completely normally. And then when I pressed stop recording, it took longer period of time to write to the card than normal. Now, I was using CF Express Type A cards, which are very fast cards. So that was not normal, but I was also taking some of the footage at high frame rates. So I was thinking maybe the footage was a little bit bigger. So I didn't really think too much of it. And I continued kind of taking a bunch of footage all throughout the botanical garden, inside and outside, taking footage for the rest of the day. There was even a part of that footage that was actually in the food hall. So we did a lot of activities during that time period. I even changed out the battery twice. I restarted the camera multiple times. At no point in time did I ever get a warning from the camera that something was wrong. It was only that I noticed when I got back to the hotel that evening and I filmed an entire room tour, which all of you got to see. So, you won't really notice it in the video, to be honest, but we filmed an entire room tour. So I had pretty much a day of footage all on this CF Express Type A card. Well, at that time period, I actually noticed when I plugged it into my computer that a lot of the day's footage was missing. Basically everything after about halfway through the food hall was not showing up when I transferred it. Luckily, I use a piece of software called Hedge, which is a piece of software that helps me transfer footage. Now, that footage was telling me all of the files that it had transferred, and I noticed that the sequence number from the camera, so it increments by 1 every time it takes a clip. Anyways, I noticed the difference between the counter and what had transferred on to the computer was about 200 clips. Now, most of those clips are pretty short, some of them are a little bit longer, but I noticed all of them were missing. Basically everything after the counter stopped to the counter where it was now on the camera. So I took the card back out, I plugged it back into the camera just to see if I could play back the footage in camera. Well, I couldn't. So at that point, I pretty much realized that I probably had lost all of my footage from that day, which, as you know, is quite depressing. It's very infuriating, especially if you took a lot of time and effort, or if you're traveling internationally, you may not get a chance to go back. I did two things that were very lucky, and I think these are probably something that I will continue going forward. There is some areas that I could definitely improve upon, which I will share those later, and some tips and tricks that were given to me by Sony and Angelbird, which were the card provider. So first off, the one thing that I did that I was really happy that I did was actually every night on those trips, I transferred all of the footage from the cards to the computers. So I had pretty much a running record of all of the footage that I had. It would have been really bad if I had waited till the end of the trip to transfer the footage, or if I had continued using that card. Maybe I had, potentially formatted it or overwritten it. I would have lost everything or any chance of recovering that. So that's probably one of my first recommendations is designate a time where you regularly back up your cards or regularly pull all of your footage back from your camera card onto your laptop or external hard drive. But always keep at least a second copy as soon as you can. The second thing that I would like to mention is I would recommend getting some sort of file transfer software. I know that Sony has Catalyst Browse, which you can tell it to transfer all of the clips and footage from that way. I know that there's a group called Hedge, which is what I use. It's been a great tool. I'll put a link in the description below. I'm not affiliated with them. I pay them money for all of my software. They have no idea that I'm making this video, so I should, probably put that out there. They also have some additional software. It's used professionally in the industry. So that's pretty much why I picked it up in the first place. All right. The second thing, and this is something that I did not do that I probably should have done, was I should have simultaneously recorded to 2 cards. I only recorded to 1 card, and this was probably a mistake on my behalf, but I had never really lost footage in the past, so I had never really seen the real intention of writing to 2 cards at once. I saw that it's kind of like a waste of space, and that it would be expensive because every time you bought a 1 terabyte card, you'd have to buy 2 of them in order to simultaneously write to both of them at the same time. So that's something that I've recently changed. I've went ahead and forked over the money and just went ahead and bought a second card. Now, interestingly enough, Angelbird has stopped making these cards, but there is some other cards that are available out there. So let me talk a little bit about my experience getting support through Sony. First off, I really want to say thank you to Sony Pro Support. I know that I'm not a big creator. I know that I don't have a lot of money with them. I'm not making a feature production film. I don't have millions of followers or anything like that. But I want to say, a huge shout out to them and a lot of respect, because they treated me like I was a professional because I had a professional camera. They gave me recommendations. I shared a lot of my setup with them, and they, were able to send me emails back and forth, even though I was on, European time. At the time I was calling back to the United States, and they were able to give me a lot of information about how I should use the camera, things that I could do to potentially limit this in the future. And then, some of the recommendations about basically reinitializing the camera as a whole. And that's something that I actually learned that I did not know. The 2 primary recommendations that Sony gave me was, 1, pretty much format your card anytime you are starting a new shoot, anytime you are, beginning to take footage on a long trip. Don't just trust that your card's been formatted in the past. Maybe your firmware version has changed, but format your card before you start shooting. But that also kind of comes with some caveats. You have to make sure that you got all the footage off of that. So you can't just format cards and then, because it will delete everything that you have on there. But the second thing that they also mentioned to me, and this is something that I had not really known about in the past, is that if you're ever going to be making a big shoot or doing something entirely different or new, reinitialize the entire camera. That basically resets the camera to factory defaults. And after you reset the camera, you can reload all of the data if you save all of your presets to your card. So you reinitialize the camera and then reload all of your presets, and that kind of gives you a base starting of your camera, which means any settings that you've changed in the past or anything that you've moved away from your preset settings, that will help you bring you back to a baseline. So that was the key, kind of set a baseline for your camera. The other piece of information that Sony gave me, which I'll be honest, I'm not sure I totally agree with, but they recommended, of course, using only Sony CF Express Type A cards. I feel like there's a little bit of conflict of interest there because, Sony's making the camera and they want to sell their CF Express Type A cards. Their cards are very expensive. If you're not familiar with the Sony ecosystem, the CF Express cards Type A cards were originally made by Sony for a lot of their own internal purposes, but because of that, they charge an excessive amount of money for them. I personally don't think that they are worth what they charge. I do have some Sony cards in the 80 gig size, but anything larger than the 80 gig size starts to get very, very expensive. And to be honest, you don't need those to unlock the highest rates of recording for this camera, especially if you have an FX3. So that's why I went with Angelbird. I have used them in the past for a number of standard SD cards. I've used them for drives for an Atomos Ninja. I've seen them as a very reliable brand. They're actually made in Austria, which was very interesting because I was in Denmark, so I was just a few countries away, and I was actually, just had traveled from Germany, which was, right across the border from Austria. So these are a pretty trustworthy brand, to be honest. And I really enjoyed working with them. I had never had a problem with them in the past. But Sony recommended that I reach out to them. So let me talk about the card manufacturer's story. And these are the people who really helped me out, if you want to know the truth. So when I first reached out to Angelbird, I let them know what happened, and basically I sent them a bit more information about what I was doing at the time and what I noticed on the camera. Sony had basically said that they didn't think that there was anything wrong with my camera, but they advised me to reach out to the card manufacturer. So once I sent them an email, they immediately sent me back an email saying, hey, please send us the card. we'll send you a prepaid packaging label. Please don't write anything else to it. Please don't, attempt to use the card any further. You'll potentially damage anything that we could salvage. So that's, I guess, one of my first tips on the card manufacturer side is to, anytime you notice any oddities with your cards, send them back almost immediately to the card manufacturer. That will give you the best chance to recover any data that you may or may not have on there. The second piece of information that I will give you is always find a card manufacturer that has a good reputation in the industry. And that was interesting because even Sony said to me, hey, we recommend using Sony cards, but what card were you using? I said Angelbird, and they said, okay, they're pretty well known in the industry, and the gentleman that I was talking to was very nice, and he said, they wouldn't be in business if they weren't good, which I think is kind of debatable, because there's definitely, everybody knows there's stuff on Amazon that's not exactly that high quality, but try to find a manufacturer that kind of has a in-house data recovery service. And that was something that was specifically actually on the bottom of this card. So it says in-house data recovery service, which that was something that I never thought I would ever use. I actually thought it was, to be honest, kind of totally bogus, but this is the reason that we got all of the data back. And this is why I will always buy reputable brands cards as much as I can in the future. I know that, money is not an option for everybody, but if your footage is valuable, spend some money on your cards as well. I think I should give you a note here. I said in the beginning of the video that none of you probably noticed that any of the footage was actually missing, and that was a saving grace for me, because we actually were able to get it all back. Now, Angelbird sent back an entirely new card for me with the recovered data on the card. Which was really nice. They actually put it in a specific folder. They organized it by, any of the information and metadata that they had. And they told me, hey, we've done our best to recover it. We think we've got everything. However, we recovered everything on the card, which at the time was 600 gigs of data. They also said, because we don't trust this card anymore, because this card has already failed, we're going to go ahead and send you an entirely new card, which I think is a very nice thing for them to do. To be honest, I would have been okay if they would have, not sent me back the card and just sent me back the data. I think I would have, kind of chalked that up to the cost of doing business and bought another card. But the fact that they were able to send me an entirely new card gave me a lot of confidence to continue buying their products. Let me kind of recap here some of the, takeaways from this, some of the key things that I think everybody should be aware of. So the first thing is, always buy reputable brand media for your device. Always make sure that it's meeting the standard of what your device needs. So if it says it needs V90, then get a V90 card. If it says it needs something that, I think there's like A400 or something like that, there's a new spec for CF Express Type A. But if it says that it needs those standards, definitely try to buy something that meets that standard. If you're not sure, you can always reach out to the manufacturer and buy whatever the manufacturer recommends, like for example Sony. So if you want to be 100% certain, you could buy a Sony card. That might have made it a little bit easier if I would have had a Sony camera and a Sony card and I called Sony Pro Support. They would have been able to kind of walk through some of the information at the time. The other thing that I should mention that I actually worked out with Sony is after I returned from my trip back to the US, Angelbird was actually able to recover my data. They sent me a little note saying that they were unsure why this occurred. However, they did notice that it may be from loose contacts on the card. So other than that they gave me no additional information. They did not blame it on the camera manufacturer. Sony didn't blame it on the card manufacturer. So, I was really appreciative of the professionalism on both sides there. But out of an abundance of caution, I decided to send the camera back to Sony into their Pro Support warehouse and have them take a look at it. I sent them all of the information that I had. I actually wrote a little narrative to kind of explain what happened with my camera, how it occurred, any of the things that I had done, including like replacing the battery, like restarting the camera multiple times, all of the things that I had done. I had second cards in there, and I had never had an issue with this card prior. I sent all of that information off to Sony in their Pro Support repair, and they replied back to me, hey, we don't see anything necessarily wrong with the camera. However, we would like to replace the main board on the camera just to ensure that this doesn't happen again. This could have happened from loose card contacts. And so we can go ahead and replace the main board, which includes both of the card slots. So that was kind of expensive. I think it was $800. But I went ahead and had them do that just because I wanted a camera that I could trust, that I could take on trips with me and not be concerned that I would lose footage again. So, you know, it was expensive. You know, once again, I kind of chalked that up to the cost of doing business. I did switch to, you know, the standard SD cards for a while and had no issues with the SD cards. To be honest, I think that there was probably, you know, something to do with the main board and the loose connections there, because ever since I've replaced that, I've not had a single issue with the card. You know, to be honest, it could have been an entire fluke, but I think that, you know, that was definitely a good solution. It makes me feel a lot better about using the camera going forward. They also did give me a discount since I was like a few days, like 30 days outside of the warranty. So it's kind of like right there, but that does happen. Hopefully this video helps you out. If you ever find yourself in this situation, my first recommendation is always just contact the manufacturers. You will probably be without the card for that time period, so always bring an extra card and kind of swap those cards out. Always keep an eye on your cards. If you ever see something that's kind of going weird or going bad, definitely, you know, replace that sooner rather than later. Comment down below if you've ever lost a card or ever had data lost on a card, and kind of tell me your story, because I'm curious if it went the same way for you as it went for me. Also, let me know if you've ever had your data recovered. You know, I've never had that problem in the past, so this is a first-time experience for me, so I'm curious if anybody else has had that situation. I think that's it for this video, so go ahead and like and subscribe. We do appreciate that. We are trying to grow our channel. We would love to have more subscribers. We'd love to have you on our channel, and if you made it this far in the video, hopefully you like travel content, because we make a lot of that. And I also try to make studio videos here where I kind of talk about some of my experiences with the tech. All right, that's it for this one. I'm just playing with that box. That's probably not a good idea. Now that I got that out of my system.